Hey there, everybody. I'm Alex. I've been playing Magic the Gatherings for about the past 20 to 25-ish years, starting out making decks with my best friend in his bedroom out of a huge box of cards that he had. I went on to play on a local tournament level during the original Ravnica block, though never quite competitively. I then found out that Commander, when that came out around the time of Gatecrash, was one of my favorite formats because it attracted a more casual audience who was more interested in sort of seeing their deck do the thing and creating a narrative experience with one another. I've really taken to a playstyle known as group hug or politics, so I like to give out resources to my opponents, and I want to, if I can beat them in their strongest position possible. I say all of that to let you know how I'm going to be looking at cards and rules and so on. So I'm going to be looking at everything from the perspective of a player who likes politics, who likes group hug, and who likes EDH specifically. And I want to make today's video as part of a request from someone else on Facebook where they were asking about my deck list. Because I am very much so sold to my gimmick. I run Kenrith the Returned King, originally piloted by Corona the False God, as a 5-color group hug deck. I am 100% dedicated to the idea of creating group hug decks. I am currently working on 2 or 3 other ones at the moment, but Kenrith is the one that I have completed. So let's go ahead and look over at Archidect. And I was just asked, like, what's the deal with the deck? What kind of build do I have? So, I have been talking about a handful of the cards that I have in my deck. You'll notice I've got Belby Corrupt Observer, and if we take a look down here... Oh, I must have removed her recently. I had Jolene in here. It looks like she's come out recently. Probably because I picked up things like Tempting Contract and Master of Ceremonies as, like, standard. Oh, no, okay. It was definitely this one, Descent into Avernus. And these cards are all part of a huge package of AoE mana generation. So we've got Descent into Avernus, we've got Eldmari's Vineyard, we've got the Magus around here. If we just... Here he is, Magus of the Vineyard. Marching Duodrome is one of my favorites in the deck. And they're all meant to not just accelerate me as a player, but accelerate all of my opponents. This is part of the standard group hugs big I want to give out mana thing. Instead of just giving out land drops as your average, as your standard group hug player might do, I also give out temporal mana into your mana pool. However, I do also give out land drops in the form of Veteran Explorer. If we go up through here, where'd she go? Oh, we have Scholarship Sponsor, Root Weaver. There you are, Root Weaver Druid, which is one of my favorite grants land drop cards because this also steals lands from your opponent. So it'll give them 2 lands from their deck and it'll give you one of them. I also carry a copy of Collective Voyage in my deck because that join forces cost is really, really effective if you can find ways to give your opponents extra mana on your turn. Then Collective Voyage becomes even more powerful. That is unfortunately not part of the package that I carry with me. As far as card draw goes, card draw is a bit of a unique thing in this deck. It breaks down into 2 separate categories. We're going to have cards like Master of Ceremonies, Howling Mine, and Temple Bell, which just give them straightforward card draw. But then we also have cards like Spy Master of Trust, which give card draw for doing the thing. And we have Karn the Betrayer and Coveted Jewel, which are card draw for whoever possesses them, or in Karn's case, whoever loses control of them. I really, really like these effects. So, Coveted Jewel, when you take control of it, you draw 3 cards. And then if somebody hits you, they'll take control of it, they'll untap it, they'll draw 3 cards. Karn the Betrayer, he has to attack every turn. When you lose control of Karn, you draw 2 cards, and if damage would be dealt to him, prevent that damage. And an opponent of your choice gains control of Karn. So we can use other cards to make sure that Karn gets shifted around the field, such as this face card here, Task Mage Assembly, which we recently talked about in our options episode. So you can tap 2 to deal 1 damage to any target creature. So if Karn is on the field and he's gone over to an opponent, you tap 2, target Karn, and they have to hand it off to somebody else. It'll take a bit of politicking to get him to come back to your side of the field, and if you look too desperate, your opponents are probably just going to keep teasing you with him, but try to keep your head, try to be understanding of how you ought to be activating Task Mage Assembly. We have in here, I think, is it 3 of the Mongers? So yeah, we have Squallmonger, we have Wishmonger, and we have Sailmonger. Because Scandalmonger and Warmonger, as it turns out, are just either not that effective or just not going to be used by your opponents or even yourself, really. Scandalmonger, at a certain point in my history, I saw as being a very scary card, but it turns out that actually he's just not that fun to have around. In older versions of Elder Dragon Highlander, opponents would have taken advantage of a Scandalmonger being on the field and drained an opponent's hand entirely. However, tapping 6, 12 mana, whatever, in order to drain out your opponent's hand entirely is just, it's not really worth it much anymore. I mentioned having Edric's Biomancer of Trust in here. After watching some episodes of Shuffle Up and Play by the professor at the Tolarian Community College, I think it was Gavin Verhey had a copy of Ludovic on the field, and it inspired me to put Ludovic into my own deck, because Ludovic, just like Edric's Biomancer of Trust, rewards opponents for damaging one another. So this is at the beginning of each player's end step. That player may draw a card if a player other than you lost life this turn. So it gives your opponents a pretty good incentive to start swinging at one another, which I find really, really funny, if nothing else. As far as any level of pillow forting, I try to avoid pillow forts. I find that they're generally unenjoyable. I tend to try to incentivize my opponents to attack one another instead of trying to prevent them from hitting me. So, Belby Corrupt Observer. We've got Edric's Biomancer of Trust. We have, of course, Ludovic. The only bit of pillow forting I have in here would be Nils, Discipline Enforcer. And Nils gives +1/+1 counters to 1 creature each opponent controls until end of turn. And then they have to tax to attack, equal to the number of counters on that creature. A card that'll likely get cut in the future if we don't increase the amount of +1/+1 counters generated by this deck is the Evolution Sage. There is a deck she will likely go into featuring Kroos Defense Contractor, but I don't think that she really fits into this deck too well. I managed to pick up a copy of Awakening not that long ago, and this card is absolutely wacky. This is a card that will change the face of the entire game, as it encourages your opponents to tap out as much as they can on their turn. So at the beginning of each player's upkeep, untap all creatures and all lands. This card, like, if you want to incentivize opponents to attack one another or any of that stuff, I think Awakening is absolutely the direction you want to go in. Your opponents will absolutely tap out as much as possible, as often as possible. Yeah, it's a very wacky card. Let's see. Okay, yeah. Um, let's see. Okay, so this is another one that I talked about in the options video, but Endbringer's Revel has actually been really, really helpful, both politically and personally when playing. So, Endbringer's Revel allows you to return a creature card from your graveyard to its owner's hand. Any player may activate this ability, but only any time he or she could play a sorcery. So, Endbringer's Revel can make it so that you can pull creatures back from your own graveyard to your hand, but also if you need to be able to make part of a deal, Endbringer's Revel can, hey, if you don't attack me, I'll give you your Grey Merchant of Asphodel back, or something like that. And I've been able to tempt opponents with stuff like that before. Although, personally, my favorite way to do that is what I'm going to call the Advocate Cycle. If I can find at least one of them in here. I know I've got you. Here we go. Pulse Mage Advocate. So this is the one that I actually ended up using to sort of try to take advantage of some opponents at one point. So you tap him, return 3 target cards in an opponent's graveyard to his or her hand, return target creature card from a graveyard to play. This card is so much fun. And I use Null Mage, who does the same thing, except it's 2 cards, and you destroy an artifact or enchantment. And then where did Spurn Mage go? Oh, is he the one that went missing? Spurn Mage is the same thing, except he destroys an attacking creature for 1 card. So you can use these for really, really strong political deals. Everybody will be playing counter spells or removal or just something they want to get back into their hand, and being able to recur your own creature with it is really powerful. I think it's I would argue it's more fun than Endbringer's Revel, but honestly, I don't think it particularly matters which one's more fun. Oh, I did actually forget a bit of pillow forting that I have. That is Rhystic Circle. This is an interesting one. So I'm going to call this a bit of a land war card. So you tap 1, and your opponents may tap 1. If nobody does, the next time a source of your choice would deal damage to you this turn, prevent that damage. I would have thought that this card would not be very effective, but when opponents see that I've got 5 mana open, and that I'm willing to just sink it to avoid taking damage, a lot of the times my opponents will just be like, whatever, yeah, just fine, you're not taking the damage, great. This card can single-handedly turn the tide of an entire game, especially because, it removes sources of damage. It can cause your opponents to have to tap out in a time where, like, that's not disadvantageous to you. Having yourself tap out, that is. So, yeah, Rhystic Circle I don't know if I would say it's really good, but I think it's good fun. Of course, have Rhystic Study in here. Ugh. Whatever, Rhystic Study is not that great. Mass Hysteria is one I've had come out a couple of times. I don't even know if it's changed games that much, though, oddly enough, because while Mass Hysteria, it gives everybody haste, all creatures on everybody's side of the field. Well, it gives all of them haste. By the time I generally have it come out, it doesn't have much longevity in its effectiveness. Let's see. Oh, here's a card that absolutely. So, treasures are a thing that happen a lot, especially when you're playing cards like Descent into Avernus. Um, Descent into Avernus, during each of your upkeep, put 2 descent counters onto it. Each player takes that much damage and creates that many treasures. Blink Moth Urn gives players mana equal to the number of artifacts they control. So you have Descent into Avernus, it goes off on your upkeep, everybody creates 2 treasures, and then during that player's pre-combat main phase, they get at least 2 mana, then at least 4, and oh god, Descent into Avernus, the math on it's weird, because it's 2, and then 2 more. So if they didn't spend the treasure last turn, it goes 2, 6, 12. It gets wacky. It gets very, very wacky. And yeah, turn by turn, Descent into Avernus and Blink Moth Urn, they create massive amounts of mana that if you can give your opponents the right sort of mana sinks, such as Squallmonger, which is one of my favorite across the board mana sinks. Yeah, giving all of your opponents access to that much mana via things like Master Ceremonies, Tempting Contracts, Descent into Avernus, and then having Blink Moth Urn on the field. They'll be able to play any of their own cards, sure, but yeah, having Squallmonger, just being like, hey, you got a bunch of extra mana sitting around? You could just sink it and deal damage to everybody on the field, which I find a whole lot of fun, as far as that goes. Honestly, playing this Kenrith deck, it's a huge grab bag, and I'm in the future probably going to try to avoid building 5-color decks for Group Hug and try to focus more on individual themes. Playing Kenrith, like I said, it's a ton of fun. The downside is that it is all, well, first off, it's a bit of a battle cruiser. It definitely doesn't start until like 3 mana. If we go down here into the stats, yeah, our mana curve goes 3, 4, 1, 2, and like fairly heavily leaning into the 3 and 4. Interestingly, our most common creature type is human, which I didn't actually expect. I didn't know what to expect, but that was definitely not it. We have a fish in here? Who's our fish? Oh, it's our boy! It's our boy! So, I was looking for a Vedalken Orrery effect, and I found Tidal Barracuda, and I absolutely love this man. He gives everybody flash except on your turn. I should be receiving Vernal Equinox here soon. It's not going into this deck because I have my fishy lad here. Let's see, what are other important things in the deck? Tempt with Reflection is really, really good as like okay, the game kind of needs to come to a close at some point card. Being able to copy a creature, although actually no. I say it's for when the game needs to come to a close, but I think the funniest time to use Tempt with Reflection is on turn 3 or 4 when you have a Marching Duodrome on the field, and you hit it with Tempt with Reflection, and you try to convince all of your opponents that it's definitely worth it to get their own Marching Duodrones onto the field, and suddenly you're swinging with 5 of them, your opponents are each swinging with 1 on their turn, and the whole field absolutely goes insane with a bonkers amount of treasures and mana, and you can be like, well, I can eventually play Blink Moth Urn, and all those treasures are gonna turn into even more mana for you. If a player manages to get mana screwed against this deck, I'd be impressed because I hand out so much extra mana. Oh yeah, and Heartbeat of Spring, which doubles mana produced, or as one additional mana for all for all of their land taps. So there's that. Um, let's see. I've been looking for lands that give your opponents mana. The closest I've gotten is Field of Ruin here, which destroys a non-basic and lets everybody search for a basic, which is fairly close to what I'm looking for, but not quite. Um, Forbidden Orchard is pretty good. Whenever you tap Forbidden Orchard for mana, target opponent creates a 1/1 colorless spirit. This is one you definitely want to look out for, though, because even if you're using what is it? Where is it? Where'd it go? Even if you use Chromatic Lantern, Forbidden Orchard and City of Brass keep their native effect. So that this is whenever it taps for mana. This is not part of the first ability. So if you have Chromatic Lantern, even if you tap it for Chromatic Lantern's version of its effect, your opponents will still get that 1/1 colorless spirit. Now, this can be used by other decks, and I'm planning to use Forbidden Orchard in another deck to take advantage specifically of the token generation. So hopefully we're like kind of looking forward to that. Mana Confluence is sort of like it's a better City of Brass simply because the paying one life is part of the effect. So something like Chromatic Lantern turns off the life cost from it, which is really nice. Mokokoro is just it's a temple bell, except you pay 2 each turn, which makes it simultaneously a little bit better and a little bit worse because it's a land. So I'm I'm actually I don't I think I've used Mokokoro once or twice to get those draws, but then you eventually end up with a Temple Bell or a Howling Mine or anything more interesting to do on your turn, and Mokokoro sort of falls by the wayside. You'll see I've got a lot of temples in here. This is a deck that requires a lot of mana correction. And while people have been weirdly down on the temples as of late, but I think they're so good. Like getting that it's not a draw, it's just scrying. But like sometimes you just don't need the extra land. You'll see I've got a very low number of basic lands in here. It says I have 3 swamps in here. I actually only have 2. Um, I think I forgot to add a card into here, and I can't figure out which one it is. So hopefully we figure out what that is eventually. Oh, I forgot about these two. So I don't, as you see, I don't have much in the way of removal in here. I argue that like Task Mage Assembly and Squallmonger are removal. Null Mage Advocate is removal. So we've got like 3 pieces there. Um, what else can we dubiously call removal in here? Oh, Evil Twin. Evil Twin is definitely a source of removal for a creature specifically. Um, uh, Duelist Heritage is removal if you don't think about it. But, so yeah, I run Swords to Plowshares and Oblation. I was considering running Beast Within and Gifts Ungiven. I can't remember what it's called. The white elephant one. But I found actually 2 pieces of removal that I'm particularly fond of are Chain of Vapor. Return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. Then that permanent's controller may sacrifice a land. If they do, they copy it. And then that chain just keeps going and going and going. If you're familiar with Chain of Smog, that's how that card works as well. And then there's the one I really like here, which is Chain of Acid or Chain of Responsibility. I played this the other day against somebody who was playing Camella, and they had a Wandering Anarchaic on the field. I played Chain of Vapor without paying, the Wandering Anarchaic's ability, paying for the Wandering Anarchaic. So I destroyed, I think it was the Wandering Anarchaic, if I remember correctly. And I just look at the woman piloting the Camella deck, and I'm like, all right, I'm not paying the 2. You get 2 copies of Chain of Acid, and she targets one of each of the other opponent's permanents, because of course I'm a group hug player. Everything I have on the field is benefiting everyone. At which point I look at them and go, all right, do you want to do the irresponsible thing or the fun thing? And both of them just sat there for like 20 seconds talking back and forth about like, okay, I really want to. She's got that big boomy thing. If we destroy it, she's going to get destroyed. Because there's no additional cost to copying Chain of Acid. So this could be the world's most threatening board wipe. One of those where, like, if nobody does the right thing, if nobody does the responsible thing at any point, this could take out everybody's creatures and lands and enchantments and artifacts, all of it. It could wipe all of it out. Chain of Acid is literally the perfect card. I I love it. I love it so much. And if you've got your own Wandering Anarchaic, or no, hold on. Make copy of the spell. Right. Okay. No, because Wandering Anarchaic won't copy copies. Although, I wish this was in red or black. Or blue. Doesn't matter which. Because I'm thinking of building a Parnice deck. And something like Chain of Acid in Parnice would be so funny. Okay, I could keep rambling on about this deck forever. And I really want to. Like there's so much here. I got some criticism for not being able to close the game out, which is why Descent into Avernus went into the deck. It's also part of why Karn the Betrayer is in here. It's part of why Evolution Sage is in here. It's specifically why Mana Charge Dragon is in here. I used to have Fan Favorite and Feral Hydra in here, but I found that they weren't really doing the thing literally at all. So instead, prompting your opponent, hey, I'm attacking this person. If you've got any open mana, I can increase the amount of damage that I do to them. Do you want to help? Yeah, having that as an option is really good. And there's a handful of other cards that work in a similar way or literally the opposite way, like Capricornian, which when you attack an opponent, they can pay 2 to give it a +1/+1 counter and redirect it to another opponent who can then pay 2, and so on and so forth. I love Capricornian. It's so good. It might end up in this deck at some point, but I think that this is more or less the finalized version. The one big change that is going to be happening here in the next 2 weeks is I'm going to be adding in one more card, maybe removing Coveted Jewel or Chrome Lantern. I don't know yet what's getting replaced. But I was shown a infinite combo with Kenrith that, because I got the criticism, hey, you need to be able to close out games, I'm planning on putting in a combo that allows me to, with Kenrith and Biomancer's Familiar or Heartstone, which is also coming in the mail, you'll play Composite Golem. Composite Golem sacrifices for one of each color. You activate Kenrith's final ability here to return it to the battlefield under your control. But because the final ability here will cost 1 or 2 less, depending on if you're using Biomancer's Familiar or Heartstone, it'll cost 1 or 2 less. So you bring it back, you have 1 or 2 mana floating, sack it again and again and again, and you'll infinite mana, and then Kenrith's 4th ability here allows you to have an opponent draw 1 card. So you just generate an unlimited amount of mana, and then you have opponents do the slowest, most painful mill ever, which I think is um, perfectly in line with the group hug sort of annoying strategy. Um, so, according to Architect, the deck's cost is around $360. The salt sum is 25.3. So it looks like we are on the lower end of the salt curve, which does line up with what I have seen from my local game stores. People do very much so seem to enjoy sitting down with this deck across from them. Although it is important to know that this is a deck that I absolutely need second and third decks to play that are not going to ask my opponents for as much, because this is a deck that creates very confusing board states. This deck, because of the sheer number of options, because of the extra card draws, the extra land draws, the vestigial mana from cards like Eldmari's Vineyard and Belby, because of all of this, your opponents are going to end up a bit mentally fatigued, which, might be what you're looking for, but as like the second or third game of the night, maybe putting Kenrith aside and being like, okay, let's play something more straightforward, like a chaos deck. No, don't play a chaos deck. Chaos decks are just not fun in that front. Um, yeah, quite frequently ending up like, oh, turn 1, I have Eldmari's Vineyard. Turn 2, I have Howling Mine. Turn 3, I have Font of Mythos. And now everybody's playing a whole bunch of cards, drawing a whole bunch of cards, got a whole bunch of free mana. It makes the game get pretty wanky pretty fast. So do try, if you are trying a deck like this, to have some level of mercy. If you're looking to bring down the cost of the deck, I am pretty sure cards like Rhystic Study can easily come out of the deck. You're already generating so much value from your card draws. So many card draws from cards like Master Ceremonies, and Temple Bells, Howling Mines, all of those. The Rhystic Study is a bit of a nice to have. And that is a $50 card that I would say is absolutely unnecessary. Primal Vigor here, I very rarely actually get to play this card. Mostly because I just haven't drawn it yet. But it's another one of those that's nice to have, but isn't absolutely necessary. I would argue, personally, let me make sure I've got the card correct here. Yeah, so there's a 59-cent alternative that I kind of prefer personally to Primal Vigor, and that's going to be Dual Nature. If we just look at Dual Nature, whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield, its controller puts a token that's a copy of that creature onto the battlefield. Whenever a non-token creature leaves the battlefield, exile all tokens with the same name. When Dual Nature leaves the battlefield, exile all tokens put onto the battlefield with Dual Nature. So if you're looking to create an equally confusing board state with a evenly, in my mind, powerful card, Dual Nature could easily replace Primal Vigor for 60 cents. It's going to cost a bit more in mana terms, but I mean, look, we're running Eldmari's Vineyard, Magus of the Vineyard. We have Selvala in here generating mana for us. Rootweaver Druid generates land drops for us from our opponents. We have, if we've missed our own land drops, then of course Scholarship Sponsor gives us lands equal to the greatest number of lands in play. Like, we're running plenty of lands. This is not necessarily a tuned deck. Probably, tuning would happen here in the mana base. Oh god. Ooh, okay, you know what? If you're gonna try to trim down the cost, apparently taking mana confluences out would really freaking help. I had no idea mana confluences was that expensive. I I had no clue. Um But I have been rambling about this deck for a pretty long time. I am going to leave a link to this one down in the description. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this little look at my Kenrith group hug deck. I have another deck coming in the mail here in a few weeks that will be featuring Yurlock. And it will be a Yurlock group hug deck focusing mainly on the theme of mana gorging, so using effects such as, Eldmari's Vineyard and Belby. So I will play that one for a couple of weeks and then maybe make a video on Yurlock. I am also working on deck techs personally for Mathis and Quain. So Mathis is one that he gives out a bunch of bounty counters at the end of your he gives out a bounty counter at the end of your turn, and then when the bounty gets destroyed, all of that bounties control his opponents, draw 2 cards, gain 2 life, which I'm really excited for. I really have been working very hard on Mathis. There are new cards from Aftermath that I'm also interested in. So we're going to be going through a whole bunch of new decks and so on that I want to build. And hopefully you guys are looking forward to that. And hopefully I didn't ramble too much. If you are interested in more perspectives and decks and ideas and card reviews from the view of somebody who's into EDH, who's into who's into EDH, who's into group hug, and who's into politics. Sorry, I've been talking for a very long time. Hopefully the things I say will interest you some.